On December 27, 1892, Livingstone and Biddle College, now known as Johnson C. Smith University, played in Salisbury, North Carolina, with Biddle winning 5-0. Over time, HBCU football has evolved. HBCU football's popularity continues to rise. Millions attend games each year and millions more watch on television. The HBCU bands provide some of the top entertainment in the country. Over that time, some of the best players to ever play in the National Football League played at HBCUs. Every Monday through Friday on the HBCU Football Daily Podcast, national radio and television host Donal Ware takes a look at what's happening in HBCU football and talks with coaches, players, administrators, and media about the season. Make sure you join the conversation on social media. Now, here's your host, Donal Ware.
You've got it locked to the HBCU Football Daily Podcast for today, Friday, November 10th. I'm Donal Ware. It's Friday. Happy Veterans Day on tomorrow to all of the wonderful veterans, those that have served our country, those that are currently serving our country. Today we celebrate Veterans Day. In fact, it is tomorrow on Saturday. So thank you, veterans, for your service. We are so appreciative of all the freedoms and protections that you give us. So Saturday, tomorrow, is Championship Saturday on many respects. Obviously, you have the SIAC and CIAA championships, but you also have tomorrow the game between North Carolina Central and Howard that could really, in fact, decide the championship on Saturday. Think about it. You look at North Carolina Central is undefeated right now. Of course, the game is taking place in Washington, D.C. It's going to be at Howard, and it's going to be live on ESPNU. North Carolina Central wins. There's no other team that can catch North Carolina Central at that point, because the Eagles would still have been undefeated and would have one up on South Carolina State. Everybody else would have two losses at that point, with Howard losing last week. I'm not going to say inexplicably against South Carolina State, because look, it's Buddy Pugh's last season as the head coach there at South Carolina State. It's emotional. I get all of those things. But if you're Howard University, if you're the Howard Bison, and you're in a dogfight with North Carolina Central, you've got a South Carolina State team, that solid team. You look at the running game. Mr. Jawan, and that entire running game gashed North Carolina Central for 428 yards rushing. That is unacceptable. It's got to be unacceptable. If you're Howard, you're right on the cusp. Okay, I mentioned it last week. The loss wouldn't necessarily hurt the Bison, but now you're in a situation where it's a must win, and you got to win next week as well. So that was a bad loss. If you're Howard, that was a bad loss for the Bison. But again, it's another opportunity. The Bison come back home to Washington, D.C., where the Eagles have to go on the road. Let's start there, because we're gonna talk about the matchup in the CIAA championship game between Virginia Union and Fayetteville State. We're gonna talk about the matchup in the SIAC championship game between Benedict and Fort Valley State. Let's start with Howard and North Carolina Central. Everything for the Eagles offensively begins with the quarterback, Davius Richard. Now, when I look at Davius Richard, you kind of look at his numbers. He wasn't healthy early on. He played maybe, a couple of series, I guess, against UCLA, went out of that football game, but he's played the rest of the games, and he's healthy. He hasn't put up the numbers necessarily, okay, that he's put up in years past. Generally speaking, when he steps on the football field against whatever opponent it is, he's still the best player on the football field. Numbers don't always define, okay? He's averaging about 182 yards passing, well below where he was last year, 4 touchdowns to only 3 interceptions. He's completing 60% of his passes, where last year he was right around 64 or 65%. He's got some solid receivers, Devin Smith, Quentin McCall, Joaquin Davis. even Jamari Taylor out of the backfield are guys that can get it done. This is where the Eagles are going to excel, I think, against the Bison, and that's going to be in the run game. Again, you're talking about a South Carolina State team that has a phenomenal backfield. The future of HBCU football in terms of running backs is at South Carolina State, okay? Just put it like that, 428 yards rushing. But now not only do you, when you look at this team, right, it all begins with Latrell Collier in terms of running the football, is one of the best, in the conference, 4.6 yards per carry as I look at his numbers in terms of rushing, all right? But then you put the dynamic Davius Richard there because he can run the football, 489 yards rushing, 5.5 yards per carry, 13 touchdowns on the season. And by the way, he's a pretty good quarterback. And you add Jamari Taylor into that mix when maybe Collier was down a little bit, maybe a little bit gimpy. I mean, Jamari Taylor is really, really good. This offensive line, I think, is solid for North Carolina Central. I look on the other side and I look at Howard's defense. And Howard's defense up front, I think, is solid. On the back end is pretty good as well. But I really think the Eagles are really, really good offensively, and they're playing some good football. If I flip things, much like Davius Richard, Quentin Williams in a similar mode, to me, not as good as a Davius Richard, still very solid. He's had a solid season. Even if you look at his numbers last week, he wasn't necessarily the problem, didn't turn the ball over. I thought had a pretty good football game for the Bison. But, and then you talk about running backs. I mean, I think when you talk about Howard, you're talking about a pretty good, staple of running backs as well. And by the way, I think there may be some opportunities for the Bison to run the football against North Carolina Central. Okay, so you look at kind of those matchups, those dynamics. I think it comes down to this. At the end of the day, North Carolina, and you can't go by, well, this team beat this team and this team beat that team. I got it. The Eagles put it on South Carolina State, okay? Howard lost to South Carolina State, okay? Can't look at it like that. But there's the other dynamic is this. I know Trey, because you mentioned it plenty of times. Trey Oliver is not happy that Howard and North Carolina Central shared the championship last year because each had one loss, although the Eagles beat Howard head to head. Okay, this is an Eagles team that is extremely focused. And I think it's an Eagles team that's going to win this football game against Howard, I would say, by between 10 and 14 points. Game is in DC. I'm going to give that to Howard. The Howard crowd they're going to show up because it's a big time football game. So it's going to be that dynamic. I think Green Stadium holds about 10,000 people. But that said, I definitely, because if this game was in Durham, I would give the bigger edge to the Eagles. But I definitely like the Eagles in this football game to remain undefeated in its quest for its second straight MEAC championship. Now, let's look at the SIAC championship between Benedict and Albany State. This game is going to be played in Atlanta. Okay. Benedict's has been a dominant team all season. While I look at Albany State has sort of limped, if you will. The Golden Rams have sort of limped into this championship game. All Tuskegee had to do last week was beat Miles, couldn't get it done. All the Golden Rams had to do last week was beat Fort Valley State and get some help. That's exactly what Albany State did last week and was really able to get the victory. Albany State had lost the first two games of the season, big-time opponents to Wingate, also to Valdosta State, but was right in those football games, then reeled off 4 straight wins before losing to Allen, who likes to put the ball in the air, lost to Edward Waters in the last seconds as well, then blasted Miles and Fort Valley State. So look, this is an up and down Albany State team a little bit, but I think is playing well because remember, Albany State was down to Fort Valley State in this football game for the majority of the game and was able to score late, 2 touchdowns late to win and then get a stop late as Fort Valley State was driving to pull out this football game. So look, I like the way Albany State is playing. I like Banu at the quarterback position. I think he's having a solid season. The running game is good, but look, Benedict is putting up some ridiculous numbers, especially when you look at them on the defensive side of the football. They're giving up like I forget how many yards per game. They've only given up like 9 touchdowns on the whole season. They've got stud defensive ends. The defense is really, really good. The running backs are good. The offensive line is really, really good. And the quarterback play has been really, really good for Benedict. I definitely like the Tigers to remain undefeated going into the playoffs against Albany State. Okay, the CIAA championship game between Virginia Union and Fayetteville State. It's I think the 6th straight CIAA championship game for Fayetteville State. Finally got over the hump last year. Able to get over Shawan. I think it was on a last-second field goal. And look, this has sort of been the MO a little bit in terms of Fayetteville State. They've won close football games. Go back to when these two teams met in week 4, 6 seconds remaining on the road in Richmond. Fayetteville State gets the victory on a field goal, but they've been playing so many close games. And then when Fayetteville State needed the offense down by 3 scores twice against Winston-Salem State, came back, won that game 40-34 last week. They didn't really need the game, but you want to get that game momentum. And by the way, seedings for the playoffs, for the Division II playoffs. Man, I think the difference it's so hard to pick this game for a couple of reasons. Virginia Union is giving up only like 37 yards rushing a game or something like that. Fayetteville State's offense isn't great, although Owens, the quarterback, he's done, a fairly decent job as of late. The Fayetteville State defense is really, really good, but that Virginia Union defense is really, really good too. Look, we know about Jada Byers from Virginia Union, but the quarterback plays. And by the way, it's not just Jada Byers, it's the running game. And then the quarterback play has been really, really good for Virginia Union. I'm struggling because I feel like on paper, Virginia Union's the better team. But when I look at Virginia Union's schedule, it hasn't been the greatest of schedules. And Fayetteville State not only had the stronger schedule, bit of a stronger schedule, especially early on, but Fayetteville State also beat Virginia Union head-to-head. This is why I'm struggling. I feel like Virginia Union's got the better team on paper. But when I look at experience at Fayetteville State, and they've been there, they're the defending champs. To me, I think this game goes to Fayetteville State in another close football game because Fayetteville State knows how to win and has been there before. I'm going to give that edge to Fayetteville State. Your thoughts, you can hit me up via Twitter at DWare or X, at DWare1, at DWare1. Also on Twitter at Box2Row, BOXTOROW. Follow us while you're there. On the weekend edition of Box2Row, which begins tonight. Again, I mentioned Championship Saturday. So with Championship Saturday, but it begins, the show airs tonight, 6 p.m. Eastern, 5 Central Time, 3 Pacific on Sirius XM College Sports Radio. That's channel 84. Look, we've got Fayetteville State head football coach Richard Hayes. Look, we've got Virginia Union head football coach Dr. Alvin Parker. Look, we've got Benedict head football coach Janice Berry, all joining us on the program for Championship Saturday. And again, Box2Row, the weekend edition of the show begins tonight. And then, of course, if there may be, in fact, a radio station in your area that carries Box2Row, you can log on to our website, box2row.com, to find her and click on the affiliates link to find a radio station in your area that carries the program. You can also listen online and on TuneIn. You just got to type in Box2Row and find us. Don't forget to tell a couple of friends about the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. We've got you covered wall to wall when it comes to HBCU football. You can watch, as some of you may be doing right now, on the Box to Row YouTube channel. You can listen, as some of you may be doing right now, at boxtorow.com, as well as iHeartMedia.com. Again, thank you to all of our veterans. Happy Veterans Day weekend to all of the veterans. Keep it locked to Box to Row, and I'll talk with you next week.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. You can also listen to the podcast at boxtorow.com, iHeartMedia, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to get your HBCU football fix on Box to Row with Donal Ware each weekend on the radio station near you, and on SiriusXM on HBCU, Channel 142, and on ESPNU Radio on SiriusXM, Channel 84. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Box to Row for the latest in HBCU football, and don't forget to tell a friend.